Every nation has its icons, those rare individuals whose voices don't just echo through chambers of government, but thunder across generations. People like Churchill, Jefferson, Lincoln. But long before any of them left their mark on history, a young, underestimated, often failing Virginia farmer stood up, straightened his bent shoulders, and spoke words that shook the world. Give me liberty or give me death.
Welcome to Uncommon History, the podcast that uncovers the overlooked, untold, and often surprising stories that shaped our world. Each episode, we dig beneath the surface of familiar events to reveal the strange, the inspiring, and the forgotten threads of history.
Today on Uncommon History, we dive into the real story behind Patrick Henry. Not the polished textbook version, but the flesh and blood human being who stumbled through failure after failure before transforming into one of the greatest voices for freedom the world has ever known. This is not simply a biography. It is the story of how one man, once dismissed as a lazy boy, a poor businessman, an unpromising husband, helped spark a revolution against one of the most powerful empires on earth. So settle in, because today we're traveling back before the Declaration, before Washington commanded an army, before Jefferson wrote immortal words. This is a story of how the colonial America found its courage in the fiery voice of Patrick Henry. And before we begin, remember, if you love uncovering the forgotten stories, strange moments, and untold truths of our nation's past, subscribe, leave a comment, and follow our free Substack newsletter using the link in our show notes. Now let's step into the world that shaped Patrick Henry. Part 1, A Nation Under Strain. To understand Patrick Henry, we have to begin with a storm brewing long before he ever picked up a law book. The year was 1763. England had just finished what the colonists called the Last French War, a decades-long conflict between England and France. Today we call it the French and Indian War. But at the time, all the colonists knew was this: the war had drained England's treasury so severely that the empire was drowning in debt. King George III, newly crowned and intent on reasserting royal power, surveyed the financial wreckage and arrived at what he believed was the most reasonable decision in the world. America must pay. After all, he argued, England planned to station at least 10,000 troops in North America to protect the colonies from hostile nations and native tribes. Somebody had to foot the bill, and since these troops were allegedly defending Americans, the king believed the colony should pay part of their upkeep. Now, Parliament was filled mostly with the king's allies, men eager to please him, men who saw the colonies less as fellow Englishmen and more as lucrative marketplace overseas. So they passed a law that would forever alter the relationship between Britain and her colonies, a law called the Stamp Act. The new act required colonies to pay tax on nearly every paper item used in daily life: newspapers, almanacs, legal papers, wills, marriage license, deeds, promissory notes, business contracts. Each document needed a government-issued stamp costing anywhere from 1 cent to $50. That may seem small today, but in a world where income was low and coinage was scarce, this was no mild inconvenience. It was a threat, a warning shot, a declaration of power. But what Parliament saw as fair, the colonists saw as dangerous, an attempt to test how far the crown could push them. And the colonists reacted with lightning speed. Part 2, the colonists say no. When the news of the Stamp Act reached American shores, an anger unlike anything the colonies had ever felt began to rise. From Boston to Charleston, people were outraged. They argued, correctly, that England, no free man could be taxed unless his own elected representative had voted for the tax. But the Americans had no representatives in Parliament, no voice, no vote, no seat at the table of men deciding what they should pay and how they should live. So the colonists responded with a cry that would eventually become a national motto: no taxation without representation. They insisted they would only pay taxes approved by their own elected assemblies, legislatures chosen by the colonists themselves. And their frustration didn't begin with the Stamp Act. For years, the colonists had stewed under a cluster of unfair trade laws designed to enrich England at Americans' expense. Unfair law number 1, export restrictions. Colonists could not sell their products to any nation except England, so English merchants set the prices, and the colonists had no choice but to accept them. Unfair law number 2, import restrictions. Colonists could only buy goods from England, and those goods had to be shipped on English vessels. Once again, English merchants controlled the market. Unfair law number 3, manufacturing restrictions. The most offensive law of all. Colonists were forbidden to manufacture goods already made in England. Iron mined in America had to be shipped to England, turned into tools or machinery, then shipped back to America and sold at inflated prices. It was economic slavery in everything but name. And the colonists knew it. So they smuggled. They ignored trade restrictions. They manufactured goods in secret. And when the Stamp Act arrived, layered on top of all these injustices, it became the last straw. Resistance erupted. Boycotts spread. Merchants refused to import English goods. Newspapers blasted Parliament. Colonial assemblies protested. Into this firestorm stepped a man no one expected to become a hero, a man who had failed at nearly everything he attempted. Part 3, the surprisingly ordinary young life of an extraordinary man. Patrick Henry was born in 1736 in Hanover County, Virginia, to a respectable family. His father was an educated lawyer and surveyor. His mother came from a distinguished Welsh family. But Patrick was the boy who didn't fit the mold. He hated studying, hated farming. He hated nearly everything that resembled structured work. Instead, he spent hours wandering through the woods, hunting squirrels or rabbits with his gun. He fished in quiet streams. He played the violin for amusement. Neighbors whispered, "He's a lazy, idle, unserious, a boy likely to become a lifelong disappointment." At 15, his parents placed him as a clerk in the county store. He lasted a year. Then, thinking he could do better on his own, he opened his own store. But Patrick was more interested in fiddling and fishing than bookkeeping. The store failed. At 18, he married, young even by colonial standards. His parents and his wife's parents, wanting to give the young couple a good start, gave them a small farm and a few slaves to help them operate it. But the pattern continued. Patrick neglected the farm, debts piled up, the land had to be sold. He returned to storekeeping and failed again. By 23, Patrick Henry had a wife, children, and absolutely nothing to show for the first 2 decades of his life. Most men would have given up. But somewhere inside this lanky, awkward, seemingly lazy young man, a spark begun to burn. He looked around at his options, and he decided to do something bold. He would become a lawyer. Henry had no money to attend college, so he borrowed a few law books and taught himself. It took him only about 6 months of intense study. And when he appeared before the Board of Examiners, his performance was far from impressive. He barely passed. But he did. At the moment he began practicing law, something extraordinary happened. The quiet, awkward, wandering boy transformed. His mind, once uninterested in study, proved brilliant under pressure. His speech, once simple, became mesmerizing. His instincts, once unreliable, became razor sharp. Within a few years, Patrick Henry established a successful legal practice. People across Virginia began to talk about the thin, stoop-shouldered lawyer with the voice that could bring a courtroom to tears and drive men to action. And in 1765, the very year the Stamp Act was passed, Henry was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses, the nearest thing the colony had to state legislature. He arrived in Williamsburg with little more than a horse, a faded coat, and a leather satchel of law papers. But by the time he left, he would be a household name. Part 4, the Stamp Act speech that shocked the colony. Picture the scene. Williamsburg, 1765. Small colonial capital is buzzing with tension. Men gather in clusters on the dusty streets, speaking in nervous tones about the Stamp Act. Should we obey it? Should we petition the king? Should we protest? Inside the House of Burgesses, the atmosphere is no less tense. The chamber is filled mostly with wealthy plantation owners, the social, political, and economic elite of Virginia. They're educated, polished, confident, and deeply respectful of the mother country, England. Their instinct is caution. Their instinct is difference. Their instinct is patience. Then Patrick Henry rises. He was wearing a worn coat. His hair is plain, not powdered like the elite. His shoulders are hunched. He looks nothing like the men who dominate the room. The assembly members barely glance at him. But then he begins to speak. His voice starts quietly, steady, mild, almost gentle. Then he moves. He moves through his argument, and something changes. His shoulders straighten. His voice gathers force. His eyes glow in conviction. Then, in a moment that would echo across the colonies, he proclaims, "The General Assembly of Virginia, and only the General Assembly of Virginia, has the right and power of laying taxes upon the people of this colony." Gasps fill the room. Some men leap to their feet in protest. Others whisper that Henry has committed treason. His words openly challenge the authority of the king and Parliament. But the tide has turned. Henry's fiery defense of the colony's rights hits like a lightning bolt. Debates erupt, heated, emotional, and intense. And shockingly, Henry's resolution passes. This is the moment Patrick Henry becomes more than a lawyer. He becomes a leader, a voice, a symbol, a spark. His words don't stay in Virginia. They race northward. They inspire other colonies. They fuel protests, boycotts, resistance. Even in England, some support the colonies. William Pitt himself declares, "I rejoice that America has resisted." Other statesmen agree. British merchants beg Parliament to repeal the act because Americans have stopped buying England goods entirely. And finally, humiliated and pressured, the Parliament repeals the Stamp Act in 1766. But the peace is temporary. New taxes soon follow, new restrictions, new soldiers, new tensions. And Patrick Henry is far from finished. Part 5. 10 years later, a church, a crisis, and a cry for liberty. Fast forward a decade to 1775. The relationship between the colonies and England has collapsed. British soldiers have been sent to Boston to restore order. Virginia supported Massachusetts, and in retaliation, the royal governor dissolved the House of Burgesses. But Virginians are not easily silenced. Leaders gather anyway. This time in the old, modest sanctuary of St. John's Church in Richmond. The future of the colony hangs in a balance. Some argue for caution. They believe a reconciliation with England is still possible. They think the war can be avoided. Patrick Henry, he thinks otherwise. He rises once again, this time before a packed church. Every seat filled, men standing along the walls. His face is pale. His voice trembles, not with fear, but with passion. Then he begins, and what follows becomes the most famous speech in American history. "We must fight. I repeat it, sir, we must fight." He warns of the dangers of waiting. He warns that the British intend to disarm the colonies. He warns of a life of slavery under British power. He insists that this time for talk is over, that the time for action has come. His voice swells until every man leans forward, drawn in by the force beyond themselves. Then he delivers the final blow, the words that ignite the revolution. "If life is so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery, forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." The church erupts. Henry's resolution passes, and the die is cast. Within weeks, The first shots of the American Revolution are fired in Lexington, Massachusetts. Patrick Henry did not fire the first bullet of Revolutionary War, but he lit the flame that sparked it. Part 6, The Later Life of a Reluctant Legend. After his historic speech, Patrick Henry became a commander-in-chief of Virginia's forces. A year later, he was elected governor of Virginia, eventually serving 5 terms. Yet, despite his fame, Henry remained humble. He retired in 1794 at the age of 58, settling at his estate in Charlotte County called Red Hill. There he lived quietly, far from politics, far from power, far from the storms he once stirred. He died in 1799. He did not live to see all the fruits of the freedom he helped secure, but he lived long enough to witness a nation rising, a nation built on the very principles he fought so fiercely to defend. Part 7, Why Patrick Henry Still Matters. Patrick Henry was not a polished aristocrat. He was not born into greatness. He stumbled, failed, and floundered through early life. He struggled with work. He struggled with success. He struggled with expectations. But when his moment arrived, when his colony and his nation needed a voice bold enough to challenge an empire, Patrick Henry stepped forward, and he gave the world a lesson for a lifetime. Greatness is not about perfection. It's all about conviction. Freedom is not defended by the comfortable. It's defended by the courageous. And sometimes, the man least expected to stand becomes the man no one can silence. This is the legacy of Patrick Henry. Hey, thank you for joining us on this episode of Uncommon History, where we dive into untold stories, forgotten heroes, and extraordinary events that have shaped America. If you've enjoyed today's journey, do 3 things to help us keep us growing. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment or review. It helps people discover the show. Follow our free Substack newsletter for bonus content, behind-the-scenes history, and upcoming episode previews. You'll find a link waiting for you in the show notes. Until next time, keep seeking the uncommon, the overlooked, and the extraordinary truths hiding in our past. This is Uncommon History. Stay curious.